Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see the summary of The Grass is Singing by Doris Lessing. The story is set in southern Rhodesia, that is now Zimbabwe, and it takes place during 1940s. Mary Turner, who is the wife of Dick Turner, has been married, and a houseboy has accepted that he has murdered Mary Turner. Dick and Mary are poor and they do not socialize with the other white settlers in their farming district. When Mary's body is discovered, the Turner's neighbor, Charlie Slater, sends a note to the local police sergeant, Sergeant Denham. Denham then sends 6 native policemen to the Turner's farm, and he also arrives and finds the houseboy Moses, who agrees that he has murdered Mary. Charlie drives to the Turner's farm to find Moses in handcuffs and puts Dick in the back of his car. Inside the house, Charlie's assistant Tony Marston explains that he found Mary's body on the veranda. Sergeant Denham comes and he and Charlie question Tony. However, Tony begins to feel that they are not at all interested in his testimony and therefore he stops his interview abruptly. The policemen anyway take Mary's body to the car, and Tony is left wondering whether he should tell Charlie and Sergeant Denham his theory about why Mary was killed. He knows very well that Moses will be hanged, and therefore he wonders if by staying quiet he is complicit in a monstrous injustice. The next day, Tony packs his things and leaves the farming district. The trial takes place and it is decided that Moses is the one who murdered Mary, and Moses says that he was drunk and he wanted to steal some valuables from her. Tony meanwhile briefly takes a job in a copper mining but reluctantly ends up in an office job. The stores in southern Africa are simple establishments that sell food, clothes and other necessities and also operate as local post offices and usually house a bar. Mary's father is an alcoholic and he spends most of their money on liquor at the store, and this causes a fight and argument between Mary's parents. Mary's older brother and sister died of dysentery when she was a child, and the period of grief that followed was the happiest time of her childhood because at that time her parents did not fight. And Mary was then sent to a boarding school and decided to leave home at 16. Between the ages of 20 and 25, both Mary's parents died, and now, instead of feeling sad, she was actually thrilled to be left alone completely. And she lived in a club for young women and worked as a personal secretary at an office. As the years passed, Mary's friends got married and had children, but Mary remained single, happy, and carefree. She was not thinking about her aging and still dressed in a little girl fashion, and she had no desire to get married, but one day she overheard some of her friends who were married gossiping about her in a very cruel manner why she was not married, and this really horrified her, and then only she understood what people were thinking about her. At this point, she briefly got married, engaged to a 55-year-old widower, but when he tried to have sex with her, she called it off. Soon after this, Mary meets Dick, who has come to the cinema, and it was one of his brief visits to the town. Dick is a poor farmer and had bad luck, and therefore his neighbors also nicknamed as Jonah. And he had never had the idea of getting married because he was so very poor. But after meeting Mary, he was always thinking about her. Therefore, after returning to his farm, he worked so exhaustedly, and after a few months he came back to Mary's door and asked her if she would marry him. She agreed immediately and they married 2 weeks later. When Mary first comes to Dick's farm, she finds the house shut and dark and stuffy and understands the intents of Dick's loneliness. They have tea and engage in a polite but awkward conversation. They have sex, which is not as terrible as Mary feared, and even though she felt there was nothing in it. In the morning, Dick introduces Mary to his longtime black house servant Samson. While Dick clearly feels affectionate towards Samson, Mary did not like the way how Samson was talking to them in a casual manner, and therefore she treated him harshly. Mary also tried to learn the kitchen kafir, a simplified version of the native Shona language that the white settlers used to communicate with their black workers. And Mary used her time to purchase some fabrics and some items for the house, and she spent her time sewing and painting the house. And one day she comes to see that Samson had eaten some raisins and that she had saved to put in the pudding which she was planning to make. And she becomes very angry, and despite Dick's protest, she insisted that that money should be cut from Samson's wages. Samson, coming to know this, quits the job and Dick is upset. They hire another servant, but that servant also leaves them, and they keep on finding many servants, but they all leave. And they are not able to obey Mary's commands, and Mary also is very strict with them. And however, Mary finds that one person somehow sticks back, and she makes that servant to scrub the already clean zinc bathtub and makes him to work even during his lunch break. Charlie and Mrs. Slatter come over to visit, and Mrs. Slatter is friendly to Mary, but Mary is very cold towards her. The servants keep on quitting, and few days later Charlie advises Dick to plant tobacco, but Dick is resistant to the idea. One day, on a rare visit to the local train station to pick up groceries, Dick and Mary encounter a man who addresses Dick as Jonah. Afterwards, Dick admits to Mary that he had borrowed 50 pounds and still he has not repaid it. During this time, Dick goes through a series of obsessions with keeping different animals in his farm to make more money. First, he tries beekeeping, then pigs, then turkeys, but all these fail, and this causes an argument between Dick and Mary, and Dick starts calling Mary boss, which actually irritates her. Dick eventually resolves to open a cafe store on the farm, and though there is another cafe store nearby, and Dick's store will not make much money, he is insistent on making it, and he asks Mary to run the store. First, Mary denies it, but eventually she agrees. And when she goes there, she finds a native woman who sits outside the store with their children disgusting, and therefore hates her time working there. She starts fantasizing about running away and returning to her old life in the town. One day she notices that a old office has placed an ad for a shorthand typist, and without telling Dick, she packs a suitcase and leaves the next day, and she asks Charlie to drive her to the train station. Back in town, Mary visits the girls' club where she used to live, but is told that they do not take any married women there, so she does not have a place to stay. And even in an old office, they say that the typist position which was vacant is now filled. Therefore, she goes and stays in a hotel, but she realizes that she doesn't have enough money to pay the bill. At this moment, Dick comes there and begs her to come home, and Mary also agrees and comes back with him. At first, Mary and Dick, they go back to their previous routine, but Dick falls severely ill with fever. Charlie brings over a doctor who rudely instructs Mary that she and Dick must wire the house for mosquitoes and go on a 3-month holidays. That only will help Dick to recover his health. And during this time, Mary begins supervising the farm workers while Dick is bedridden. She takes a sambok with her, and when Moses, one of the farm workers, insists on getting a drink of water, she strikes him across the face with it. She also withholds wages from the workers who arrive late, causing some of them to quit on the spot. Back at the home, Mary urges Dick to focus on growing tobacco so they will be able to make a lot of money. And Dick thinks about it for 3 days before agreeing to start building tobacco barns. Dick builds the tobacco barns, but unfortunately in January there is a drought and the tobacco dies. And Dick is not able to cover the expenses, and therefore he is forced to take loan in order to avoid declaring bankruptcy. And Mary's health also deteriorates, and she begins to beg Dick for a child. But Dick refuses, saying that they are too poor and they will not be able to maintain a child. And Mary sinks further and further into misery, and so also Dick, who starts taking up chain smoking. After another house servant leaves, Dick is forced to move Moses from the field to the house, as no one agrees to work for Mary. Mary develops a fascination with Moses, watching him as he completes his work and even one day stares at him while he washes himself outside. He stops what he is doing and stares back at her until she goes away. And this angers Mary, who forces Moses to do series of unnecessary tasks. She even asks Dick if they can fire Moses, but Dick angrily refuses. Months pass by and Mary slowly becomes increasingly depressed. One day Moses tells her he is quitting, but she bursts into tears and begs him to stay. Moses now gives her a glass of water and tells her to lie down on the bed and covers her with her coat. He does not mention leaving again. Now a new dynamic emerges between them, and Moses is much more informal and authoritative with Mary, and Mary now feels completely under his power. During this period, Mary starts having vivid nightmares while Dick becomes ill with malaria. Mary dreams that Dick has died and that Moses is touching her, and her father is making sexual advances on her. In one dream, Moses and her father morph into the same figure, and she wakes up screaming. Moses, who is nearby, asks her why she is afraid of him, and Mary replies in a historical voice that she is not afraid. Meanwhile, Dick and Mary's neighbors have started spreading cruel gossip about Mary and Moses, and one day Charlie comes over and urges Dick to sell his farm. Charlie stays for dinner while he witnesses Moses and Mary's familiar flirtatious relationship. Charlie then takes Dick to one side and sternly demands that he and Mary leave the place. Dick reluctantly agrees, and Charlie asks Tony to start working on Dick's farm in preparation to take over. While living on the Turner's farm, Tony comes to believe that Mary has gone mad and needs to be treated by a psychologist. One day he catches Moses helping Mary to get dressed and is stunned by the possibility that they are having an affair. He decides to tell Dick to fire Moses, but Moses leaves that evening and does not return. 2 nights before Dick and Mary are due to leave the farm, Mary wakes up suddenly. She walks around the house in a state of paranoid delusion, swinging wildly between different emotional states. She searches for Moses, convinced that he will finish her that night. Mary is supposed to spend the next day packing but accidentally falls asleep and wakes up in the late afternoon. Suddenly, she feels some compulsion in her to go to the store, and when she goes there, she sees Moses is there. She runs away screaming and bumps into Tony, who gently tells her that he has suggested that Dick take her to a doctor. That night, Mary doesn't eat supper with Tony and Dick. In bed, Dick tells her that she is ill, and Mary responds that she has always been ill in her heart. After Dick is asleep, Mary gets up and creeps around the house, convinced that Moses is somewhere there. She goes out to the veranda, where she sees Moses in the distance. Moses comes towards her, puts her hand over her mouth, and stabs her to death. Moses at first considers claiming innocence, but later on decides to turn himself in, and therefore he agrees that he only murdered her, and he waits outside the house until morning. And here ends the story. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box. Like the video, share with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.